All right, everyone, welcome to our presentation. The title of which was very thoughtfully chosen. We're going to talk a lot about very nitty-gritty things, but we're also going to talk about a lot of big topics. And the point is, how do we prepare your student to be unprepared? Study abroad is such a big, life-changing experience because has good days and because it has bad days. And we're going to talk about how to navigate that and how to navigate the nitty-gritty, credit transfer, tuition, all of the things. And we're so excited to have y'all at this webinar.
All right, so you might have noticed that we are the NTC Office of Study Abroad, but something unique about study abroad at Tulane is that there's actually two offices that handle study abroad here. So we are the Office of Study Abroad, OSA, that's us on the left, and on the right, you'll see there's also an office for Freeman Abroad. So if you're the parent or family member of a business school student, you might want to check out the Freeman office for study abroad as an option. Those programs are only open to business majors. They're all what we call exchange programs, where there's students that are sent from universities that we receive here at Tulane, and we also send students abroad. They have their own webinar that'll be happening next month on November 6th. So if you are the parent or family member of someone that's a Freeman student, you want to make sure that you are going to that so you can get all the information. That being said, our office is open to all majors for study abroad. So those Freeman students can also be going abroad through us, especially ones that want to be completing their NTC core requirements, think like their general electives, or they have specific location goals.
So who are we? So my name is Siena Farrar. I'm the Assistant Director of Study Abroad Advising at the Office of Study Abroad and also a Tulane alumni and Tulane Study Abroad alumni. And we have a really big office, and I'm delighted to also be joined by my colleague, Mike. Do you want to say anything about yourself?
So I'm an academic advisor with the Office of Study Abroad, so I'm focused solely on helping students get abroad with that experience. There's a wide advising team here at Tulane that handles lots of different things, but us here in this office are solely focused on their study abroad experience.
Yeah, so we are a big but mighty team. And there's a lot of overlap with what we do and a lot of things that we are and we are not.
Yeah, and even after they study abroad, we consider ourselves to be intercultural educators, and we're able to assist throughout the entire application process. Again, that pre, during, and post. But again, we're part of a pretty robust campus support team. Students have a lot of advising at Tulane, lots of different advisors. So something that we really try to be is solely focused on that study abroad experience. But crucially, we're not immigration or visa advisors. This is always a topic of concern or questions among students and their families. But this is something that really our office is just not super equipped to deal with. Um, Also, we're not travel agents, although Tulane does actually have those, and we can tell you a little bit more about that later. We are also not on-site support for the majority of our semester programs. Students are going to have either a host university or a partner program provider that handles a lot of those on-site supports. So there are dedicated staff that are with your students on these programs that can be doing that kind of emergency on-site support.
So we're going to take a second to reflect. This is something that we really talk a lot about with your students, the importance of kind of thinking about the self and reflecting. So take just 10 seconds and really think about maybe that moment that you really first felt like you were an adult. And was it one specific moment? Was it right when you turned 18, or was it much, much later in life? And then, think about if you feel like your student is an adult. They might be a legal adult. They might be able to go vote as they should in this upcoming election. They might be able to go and join the army. But do you feel like they're an adult? I think one of the really interesting parts of study abroad is how much it is this negotiation of adulthood that is already happening in this much larger context. Your student has left home and they're living an entirely different life right now than they were in high school. And then suddenly they haven't just left the nest, they've left the nest and to be 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 6,000 miles away, however far. I think it is this negotiation, this double adulthood kind of moment that really provides a ton of growth opportunity for students. And it's also acknowledging that like adulthood is around the corner. They are going to graduate in just a few years. And studying abroad is a really important part of this moment of learning how to buy groceries, how to do laundry on time, how to get along with a roommate they might not like. All of these things that really do matter in adulthood. This is such a wonderful moment for them to start practicing those skills within a really safe, within safe confines.
Right. So I get additional tips on how to prepare your study abroad student. We see the most growth, we see the most change and kind of burgeoning into that adulthood with students that think about study abroad more than a vacation. The ones that are thinking about it like an academic experience. So students who pursue study abroad, just in general, have increased hireability, adaptability, and intercultural communication skills, which in our world today is vital, especially for their life after school. Study abroad can be a multitude of things for students. It can be really exciting, it can be scary, it can be fun, of course. And we encourage you to be able to support them through the multitudes. If they are having a rough day, be that ear that can listen, that shoulder to cry on, but also share in their joys too, because there's going to be a lot of those as well. So it can be this moment that can be lots of different things at any given time, and that's just something to prepare for.
So, how to do that? One of the tools that we really emphasize as an office when we are doing advising appointments with your students, when they're there, when they're not there, or they're just thinking of going, maybe, is the power of yet. I think one of the most helpful tools in your repertoire is this yet language because it acknowledges that it is hard right now and it will not be hard forever. So it really reminds them that this pitfall is not a permanent thing and that they are capable of solving it in the future. They listen to us, but they'll listen much more to you. Like you are the source of comfort. You are the person who's been there for them their entire lives. And hearing this from you, where you are validating their capabilities, is really important. And so, as these examples, I don't know how to order my coffee in Spanish. The waiter keeps switching to English every time I try to practice. It's you don't know how to order it quite yet, but the more you practice, the easier it will be. Just all of these little moments of reframing really do help.
So one framework we'd like to kind of give you with this is something that we use a lot at Tulane. It's this kind of switching of a mindset from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. So an example of this could be a fixed mindset would be if I fail at something, that's the limit of what I can accomplish. But a growth mindset would be that failure is that opportunity to grow. These are something I can't do, as Sienna was saying, yet, but once I practice more, I'll be able to do it. If you'd like to learn more about this, this kind of concept is from a book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol S. Dweck. It's a great read, and it's something that we think would be a helpful resource and something that we use a lot with our advising practices.
So, as I said before, like we really do see you as a really valued partner in your students' experience. So we each have different areas that we oversee. So, our office, we know a lot of the ins and outs of the programs. We're happy to be there for emotional support for your student. If your student's having a really hard time with culture shock, they can talk to any of us to kind of go through and think about, like, okay, like what are some really practical tools to get through this very specific moment? Or those all those kinds of intercultural coaching, as well as maybe being the middle ground between their program and them over an issue. Like if they've already tried to resolve it themselves and they're having a harder time, we are happy to be there. And then we also see your role as really important. Like you are really there to echo that growth mindset. Like I said, they will listen to you. And we also really see you as the cavalry, not necessarily the vanguard. So it's really important to let the students feel like they are the first people to solve their own problems. And that maybe once they have given it a go, they have tried and they realize, like, hey, like this is where I need to, break glass in case of emergency, then to lean on you for that kind of intermediary support. But we do want to see that the students try it first, and encouraging them to hey, say, hey, like next door neighbor, your music's a little too loud, to have that conversation with directly, rather than triangulating, is really a source of empowerment for them. Like it is what makes them realize that they are capable, that they are adults, that they can really start to solve their own problems. These are the types of life skills that students will have forever. And obviously you're their parent. You know them the best. You also know when things are really truly wrong and when you need to step in. But we would encourage you that up until that, like, really truly something going sideways point, that you encourage your student to reach out to us, to reach out to the program, to reach out to licensed professionals if necessary, but that the student is really driving this whole conversation. Because ultimately the student is the one who's having this experience. Neither y'all, not us. Like, we're not going to be living there for 4 months, or a year, or 1 month, whatever it is. They are kind of in charge of this whole process, and that independence and autonomy is something that we really value and we really work to instill in the students throughout all of this, because again, it is a life skill, and we're really happy to be part of that growth moment.
All right, so just kind of moving on to how students decide where to go, because again, this is a really student-driven experience, and there's lots of different reasons that you might want your student to study abroad. Your student might study abroad for any number of these or a combination of them. So it can be language immersion. If they're really studying Spanish and they want more practice with it, that's great. Of course, you can choose place based on heritage if your student really wants to connect with that. There's differences in academic culture depending on where a student goes. The program model may look different. On one style of program, they might be abroad with other international students like themselves. A lot of Tulane students may be on that program, or it might be a model where they are directly enrolled at a local university somewhere and really getting that immersive experience. There are options for doing internship or even research while you're abroad, so students can make those decisions based on kind of getting that future practice and expertise. And of course, things like the different courses that are offered, the different housing options that are offered, or just a different region in the world. One thing to really note about this, though, is as much as we'd like it to be the case, oftentimes these things are kind of a hierarchy of needs kind of a situation where you might not be able to get all of them. For example, you might not be able to find a biomedical engineering course that's offered and taught in English if you're going to Spain. So students might have to make some sacrifices. They might have to choose a destination over another destination based on their academic needs or based on their kind of personal desires, and then they might have to sacrifice some of those academic needs. We have lots of different options. We've got options for almost every major here at Tulane, so they do have a choice, but they might not be able to go exactly where they want and take the exact classes they want at the same time.
So this past year, we've had a record number of students go abroad. I think we are officially back to our pre-pandemic numbers and then some. So we have a huge swath of Tulane students who go. So if you combine our office and Freeman Abroad, somewhere around 67% of Tulane students in some way, shape, or form during their undergraduate career study abroad. And that's compared to 6% nationally. So Tulane students want to go. They want to have this experience, and we just want them to be prepared for that experience.
So the top five majors that study abroad at Tulane, kind of not surprising to us, is our psychology, communications, public health, neuroscience, and political science. And why do we say that? It's not because those are the only majors that can study abroad. It's because those are the top five majors at Tulane. That means that study abroad is really built into the culture here. It's a part of their academic experience. And so the top five majors that study abroad tend to also be the top 5 majors that are currently active at Tulane too. So that's really just to illustrate to you that it really is baked into the culture here.
Yeah, so we have a ton of programs in our portfolio. Recently, we like to break it down into inside and outside of Europe because Tulane is definitely a Europe-heavy sending school, much more so than pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I would say around 60% of Tulane students went to Europe. Post-pandemic, we're running around like 80 to 90%, depending on the semester. But all of these programs are pretty well-loved programs. And not to toot my own horn, but these are my photographs. And that really is Dunedin's sunrise in New Zealand. Um, and there's so many options, and we really encourage your students to look outside of not just, like these are great programs. They're also just popular. I love all of our partners at all of these locations. And I also think maybe for some students that there are programs that are better fits that are outside of this. This is more than anything just a current uh, barometer of what is popular with Tulane students. So I want to say combined, maybe 1 out of 3 Tulane students is in Spain this fall semester. And we really try to encourage a really wide variety of choices. So if your student has somewhere that they really want to go, and our office doesn't necessarily approve, we can have conversations about that. Like if your student really desperately needs to go to Antarctica, and they found a program where there's a 1 month stay in Antarctica. We can discuss those kinds of things. So the world really is a big place, and we encourage students to really think about a wide variety of locations because by that same vein, once your student has graduated, once they are doing interviews, if they study abroad is such a wonderful kind of talking point during an interview. I know that mine came up, my public health study abroad in Thailand came up during my fundraising marketing job, just because it was such an interesting point for them to see. And I think a really big part of it is that once your student has graduated, unfortunately, their peers also somewhat become their competition. So being that Tulane student who, if it's between 2 students or 10 students who have all studied abroad, all interviewing for the same job, but one of them went to Estonia, even within Europe, but went to Estonia instead of Spain. That's a really interesting differentiation compared to their peers.
So we've talked a lot about where can study abroad take your students, and again, even outside of the breadth of our portfolio, it can take you to a lot of places. But even more, we can also talk about what students have done in these places too. So these are just a couple of examples. I won't read all of them to you, but what I really want to point out here is that these experiences are all student driven. These students that are studying rare and endangered wildlife in the Galapagos decided to do that before they ever decided to submit an application to study abroad. So these kinds of experiences that they're having, whether it's taking language classes in Paris or if they're in an architecture studio at National University of Singapore, have really been chosen by your students and pursued by them too. So there's lots of really cool opportunities that are out there, but really it does have to be student driven. We can present them to the door, but they've got to walk through it.
Yeah, and so we also want to make sure that as we're thinking about your student, us, and that sense of independence, we really want to make sure that everything that is being done is student-led. There's a lot of little things that they have to do for this application. There's a lot of people that they have to talk to. There's a whole lot of just stuff that only the student can do. And this is somewhat set up to prepare them for just how many logistics are involved in studying abroad. So maybe some programs are really supportive. Okay, that's great. But still, the student may have to navigate an entirely different academic culture. They may have to really figure out what classes do and don't count for their major. There really is a lot of independence involved in study abroad. And I will say the students who really take on that independence, who really have their own personal passions that they are pursuing, they really get the most out of study abroad because they are prepared for it. I'm always a little nervous when a student really feels, lost in the process, if it feels like they can't quite self-advocate. And we're always happy to work with the students and build up their confidence. But we want to make sure that it's always coming from them. As part of that, we also, as an office and as throughout Tulane, we are bound by FERPA, so we cannot discuss the details of your student with you unless we have a signed FERPA waiver on file. And this also only can pertain within the United States. I have seen some programs where a parent will reach out to the host university with a bunch of questions, and the university says, "Hey, like, I literally cannot answer that. It is against my international law, my specific country's law to discuss anything related to a student with their parent. Sorry, like I can't even have you CC'd on an email when I email your student." And so your student is, and that's kind of part of that independence point. Like your student should always be the source of information for you. Um, and the student must also always be in an advising appointment. We don't do one-on-one appointments with parents. The student must be there, and we will have to end the call unless they are also on the conversation. And also, just for the flow of our office, please always provide your student's name on the phone. The caller ID does not populate with their name, so please always provide their full name, any details you have when you do call in.
All right, so how do we prepare students? Because again, it can be a daunting process and there's a lot of different moving pieces, right? So for study abroad advising, we have four study abroad advisors when we're including Siena. So all four of us have study abroad experience ourselves, and we provide that one-on-one advising for students. They can actually make an appointment with any one of us. Students have assigned academic advisors and major advisors at Tulane once they declare their major. However, our office runs a little bit differently, where students can make an appointment with any one of us that they kind of gel with better. That being said, we do have portfolios of majors that we advise on more than others. So we do try to specialize in certain areas just so that we have the most expertise for your students. But again, they have access to any one of us. For pre-departure orientation, we have these sessions that are available for students that have already applied through our office and been approved to study abroad. These go over lots of different concepts, things like health and safety, kind of identity abroad, ways to design your study abroad about what you're really looking for, and even how to do an internship abroad for credit. We also have peer advisors. Sometimes our advising appointments really book up, or a student really just wants to hear from a student that has just gone abroad. All of our peer advisors are seniors who have returned from abroad in the previous year or 2 semesters ago, and they can talk about their recent experiences. Sometimes it's better for a student to talk to a student. We obviously have a lot of expertise with study abroad, but it's been a bit for us. If they want to hear from somebody that literally just got back, this can be a really good resource for them. We also have Global Cafe. This is a free weekly event. It's every Tuesday from 2 to 4 in the LBC. And that's an event where students can meet with international students or other students that are interested in studying abroad and get drop-in advising from either our office or the Freeman Office of Study Abroad. So even if they can't find an appointment or they don't want to make that one-on-one appointment, but they have a few minutes to spare, they can drop by, have a cup of coffee with us, and talk study abroad. There's also a study abroad fair that happens on a yearly basis. This time around, it will be on October 28th in again the LBC, which is our kind of student center. So that event is really great because our program provider partners and university partners come to that event and do a little bit of tabling. Think like a college fair or a job fair, where students can actually walk around and hear directly from these programs what those study abroad experiences are like, and they can talk more specifically about those experiences than we could ever advise on. Things like housing, how do I actually enroll in your university, those sorts of things. We also have a family weekend presentation, although I will say if you are here listening to this presentation, you're already getting it. This is the family weekend presentation. So just to mention, if you do come to family weekend, feel free to stop by and say hello to us, but the presentation will be roughly the same. So if you have to choose between either doing this presentation or another one, you might want to choose that one.
Yeah, and so Mike mentioned a little bit back about that difference between study abroad and vacation. I would say truly the only thing they have in common is that they are somewhere else. And so, the length of study abroad can really change. We have really short programs in our portfolio all the way up to an academic year. I think one of the things that I always try to discuss with students is just how much is New Orleans itself. So we live in a tourist town. New Orleans gets roughly 20 million tourists a year from all over the place. But I would say most Tulane students maybe visit the French Quarter once a year. I really like to frame it in that lens of New Orleans because the actual residential experience in a tourist place is very, very different than the tourist experience in a tourist place. So that might mean that your students really has their brain set to, I'm gonna be in Paris. I will be within eye line of the Eiffel Tower, and I will do nothing but go to beautiful cafes, and it will be just like Emily in Paris. Students who kind of go in with that vision often have a really harder culture shock once they get there and they realize, just like we aren't in the French Quarter, dorm's gonna be a little further away, and that it's a dorm, and that there is not the view of the Eiffel Tower, and that is the point. The point is that you are learning about yourself in this entirely new context. You're learning how to buy groceries in a whole new way. You're learning how to balance doing your homework when you really, really want to go to this XYZ thing, or you want to pop over from South Korea to Japan on a ferry for a weekend, because why not? All of these little temptations, learning how to balance that. And there's plenty of students who I would rather see go on vacation with the benefits of a vacation are that there are no homework, that travel is still good for you, and you can still have really life-changing experiences on a vacation or just on long-term travel without any impact to their academic progression or timeline. So we really want students to really be making a conscious choice on, hey, maybe at this place that I really built up is a better place to visit. Maybe my actual day-to-day lived experience will be better if I am in Toulouse, I'm realizing, instead of in Paris. And I pop over to Paris every once in a while, but I'm realizing that my lived day-to-day experience is going to be so much better and somewhere that fits me better. So we always like to discuss this with students, but it really does help, asking your student, hey, like why is it that you chose Tulane? Like, what is it about like the lived experience that you are really enjoying? Maybe they're from New Orleans, maybe they're from an entirely different place within the US, within the world. But they made a choice to be here. And so thinking about that in a similar kind of context of like, well, okay, well, where is it that you really want to live? Where is it that you see yourself doing homework? Where do you see yourself having a really bad day? Where do you see yourself enjoying the sunshine? We really like to talk to students from this like lived day-to-day experience because it makes them realize, makes them think really deep and really long and hard about this choice that they're making.
So, one of the questions that we get maybe more than anything is regarding housing abroad. What does it look like? Well, the answer is it looks very different depending on where you're going. Housing is very determinant on both the place that you're going, of course, but also the program that students do. There are three main types of housing: dorm housing, which may or may not look similar to Tulane's dorms. It could even be a third-party dorm that's not run through a university. There's apartment-style housing, where students are usually with another roommate, kind of in program purchased apartments. And there are also homestays where students are living either with a host family or a host parent or somebody that is local that has opened up their house and their home to an international student so that they can have a local experience. All of them have pros and cons. There's not one best fit option that all students should choose, and also not all options are going to be perfect for all students. Some students are really going to shine in a homestay style experience. They might be very kind of friendly and gregarious and really be excited to engage with somebody locally, but a student may be really, really shy and is not feeling like that would allow them to thrive. that's completely fine. There are options on almost every program for what housing you choose. Um, One thing I will say is that you should really corral your expectations around things being like a vacation home or an Airbnb. It's really not the case, especially in a place that's a little bit older. The housing might suit that as well. If a student is going abroad to Florence, they might be in a building that is a couple hundred years old. That's actually pretty normal for Florentine housing. So that's something to expect. The housing is going to mimic and mirror the place that students are going because they're living in local housing. I do also want to talk about the global housing crisis just a little bit. So, students may not get their first choice. Oftentimes, the program does the best that they can, and most of the time they get their first choice of housing, but it can be the case that a student might get placed in an apartment if they really wanted to be in a dorm. That is also relatively normal and should be kind of encouraged. You should be encouraging your students to think about this in a flexible manner. Housing is temporary. It's not something that's going to last forever. They're abroad for 4 months, a year at most through our office. So it is going to be a different experience, but it doesn't also have to be a permanent one. On-campus living, like at Tulane, is really not a worldwide norm either. So students should expect a commute. A lot of times students go abroad to Europe and are kind of shocked when they realize they have to commute either half an hour or 45 minutes by public transit. Again, this is pretty standard and pretty normal for the majority of Europe, especially, and it should be an expectation. We often hear a lot of questions around independent housing with friends. Our office does not allow this, and it's highly discouraged. It's similar to Tulane's on-campus housing requirement. We really want students to be on their program housing. It's very important that they are going through the process because a lot of times this housing is built around that study abroad experience. It's carefully chosen in specific places in the city to kind of facilitate their academic experience and their social one. So it may even be the case where if you were to seek independent housing, you might be in a completely different area of the city with an even longer commute and very isolated from the rest of the student community. So we really don't allow it or encourage it.
Yeah, and the other really important one, housing at Tulane. So this upcoming junior year cohort is the first cohort with a third year residency requirement. This was outlined to them apparently when they received their admission letter to Tulane. But there are some major differences and considerations to have between the semester they choose to study abroad and what that means for their Tulane housing, either on or off campus. So we included HRL's phone number at the top because our office just cannot and does not deal with any domestic housing arrangements. So we cannot help students find subletters. We cannot help students with their HRL stuff. There is a very, very large department at Tulane for HRL, and that is our phone number if you do have really specific questions. But based off my last conversation with them, this is roughly how the on-campus residency requirement impacts the students and also impacts the finances. So if they go in the fall, which we are seeing an uptick in students who are seeking to go in the fall, they are released from on-campus housing in the spring semester. Many students are feeling the pressure to sign leases right now, which is very, very early and a little predatory by those off-campus landlords, in my opinion. And they're feeling like they have to sign leases. And that is partly because HRL has said that there is not guaranteed housing upon return in the spring semester. I find that still hard to believe. They are building many more beds. I think there's another 700, 800 beds coming in this spring semester. But I would say that the bottom line is that they are extremely unlikely to find a subletter. The disparity already pre this rule between students who went in the fall versus who went in the spring is very, very high. So I would say it is just kind of going off like loose budget numbers. Part of that budget should be preparing to pay for an empty bedroom for that fall semester in an off-campus housing situation. I've talked to students where they're really dead set on going in the fall, but their parents are then making them pay that difference. And like personally, my parents would have just not let me go at all if I presented them that option. And I probably would have just not gone if that was the case. But I would just say prepare to budget for paying for that empty bedroom because now with the spring students, because they are living in on-campus housing, they're not able to be part of that subletting pool for fall students. Prior, we would have a financially savvy student go in the spring semester just to make sure they could get some form of sublet in the fall and everything would be fine. Um, but I would say going in the spring is will save some money, a pretty significant amount of money, depending on what lease your student has signed. I've seen bedrooms off campus for as low as 750 and up to 2,000 per bedroom. So that really depends and is also not our domain. But I do think it's worth having the conversation with your student. Going in the fall is always a Tulane heavy experience, and going in the spring is also better networking with other college students from other universities. Study abroad is still a US phenomenon, but pretty much every other university, uh, almost all of them are spring heavy senders, which means that you really can, for your student, it can be a really good opportunity to make friends from not just across the world, but also from all over the US. So it is something to think about. We have no sway, no horse in this race, but I would encourage you to discuss it with your student.
And it's definitely not the most ideal case for every student, but I will say if a student is interested in studying abroad for a full year, that entire third year requirement is obviously does not apply to them. So it might be even the time to think about studying abroad for a full year because we can make that happen too. So as far as while students are abroad, they are still Tulane students. That means they are paying Tulane tuition and fees on approved programs. Obviously, not those housing fees or those residence fees, things like the gym, of course not, but they are paying Tulane tuition. This ensures that they are getting Tulane credit for these programs. Every program that a student does through our office is guaranteed Tulane tuition, and we handle all that university to university credit transfer for them. So that's something that they don't have to worry about, but it does mean they're paying Tulane tuition. An area of confusion that I often see with this is students or their families thinking that they are paying their study abroad program on top of their Tulane tuition. That's not the case. You're paying your Tulane tuition as you already are normally for your semester at Tulane, and then Tulane is paying the cost of the program directly. So you are not paying double for a semester abroad. It's just the Tulane tuition and instead of the program cost. So if you're on a study abroad program provider's website or a university's website and you see an additional fee associated with that, if it's education related, it's likely that you're not paying that fee directly to them. However, housing and independent costs, things like excursions or program insurance, are paid directly to the provider or host university. So tuition is a conversation between us and you, so Tulane and you, and housing is between you and the program provider or university that the student is going to. All institutional scholarships and financial aid do continue to transfer over to a semester abroad for students, though. So if a student is on heavy scholarships here at Tulane, those will transfer over to them. And we have our own internal scholarships available as well. The OSA scholarship is one of the easiest scholarships a student will apply for in their academic career. It really is a simple process and it's baked into their application. So students can apply for that OSA scholarship and potentially other scholarships as well through their program provider, their host university, or even external awards like the Gilman or Boren Awards. Those are nationally competitive scholarships, but they are available and we can help students figure out how to start those applications or figure out where to go in order to find either more scholarship money on campus or off campus.
Yeah, so our office has internal funding, and it's very, very easy for your student to apply. So I always encourage them to apply no matter what. It's basically you hit a checkbox, and there's a 150-word essay basically saying, why do you want to study abroad? What is it about you that you need additional money? Let us know. It's the easiest scholarship application in the world. But all of our partner programs also have additional funding. I would say about 99% of the time, they'll just knock it directly off the housing costs. Although some universities also have their own internal scholarships. I off the top of my head, I think it's what is it? University of Brighton, I want to say. Was it Bristol? University of Bristol has a $5,000 scholarship. They are just itching to give to students. But students don't look at it as a place to live. They're looking at it through that vacation lens, and that $5,000 is there to tempt them. I would say for students with high financial need, there are even more scholarship options. So I know, for example, CIEE has a Gilman essentially matching grant, or more of a consolation prize grant, where if you do get the Gilman Award, which is only open to Pell eligible students, they'll give you some money. And then if you don't give it, they'll still give you even more money. So there's a lot of opportunity for high financial need students.
All right, so moving on just a little bit, I mentioned before about how credit is transferred back through our office. So when a student is studying abroad through our office, their courses transfer back to Tulane automatically as general electives. So that means that if they take the equivalent of 15 US credits abroad on whatever program that they're going on, they're getting 15 US credits here at Tulane. However, if they're seeking major, minor, or that NTC core credit, that needs to be awarded directly through the department. So if a student is seeking a major credit in their architecture major, they'll need to actually have that conversation with their architecture major advisor. Um, Grades operate on a kind of different way than they do normally at Tulane. We call it kind of a fancy pass-fail. The grades will show up on a student's transcript. So if they earn an A at that university, it will show up as an A on their transcripts. However, those grades are not factored into their Tulane GPA. Essentially, their Tulane GPA is frozen while they're abroad. So what that means is that a student can go abroad and take a challenging class or take a class that's not in their native language and feel a little bit more secure in that not affecting their overall GPA. Students really should be meeting with their major and academic advisors during the application process. I know that I've said previously that students have a lot of advising. Sometimes that can feel a little bit like a double-edged sword, but we really do want your students to be as prepared as possible and having the appropriate conversations with who they need to. So that would look like having a conversation with their major advisor, their academic advisor, and a study abroad advisor too. So study abroad can sometimes be a disruptive process for a student doing their academic coursework. We want to make that as smooth as possible for them. So we want to make sure that they're talking to all the right people. Like I said earlier, too, Freeman students can study abroad and participate on our OSA programs. However, they cannot earn Freeman credit unless it's a pre-approved program. We have a specific even classes that are approved by the Freeman Business School that students can get credit for. They just need to either talk with us or be talking with Freeman to make sure that they know what those programs are, what those classes are, and most importantly, whether or not they can get credit that's factored into their specific major plan. Some courses may not count for one major, but they might for another. If it's a finance elective, it might not count for their marketing major. So things like that. They should really, all that to be said, be talking to their appropriate advisors. Just going off a little bit before, I mentioned that we're two separate offices, and take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, considering that we are both in the Office of Study Abroad and not with Freeman. But I just wanted to explain a little bit about what office might be right for your student, and they should make this decision themselves, but they should kind of know all the facts that are around it. So over in the Office of Study Abroad, we do have those options to earn Freeman credit, like I mentioned. However, Freeman course approval is still required. They'll still have to go get that credit approved by their Freeman major advisor. With Freeman abroad, that ensures that they have the smoothest path to degree progression possible. Those programs are all directly facilitated by the Freeman Study Abroad office, and they've had that conversation already with those relevant business majors to make sure that they're getting the credit that they need for graduation. With Freeman, their programs operate on exchanges. That means that some programs are limited and at capacity with how many students are coming to Tulane. So essentially, if a school has 50 students coming here to Tulane, we might only have 50 spots to send students to that specific program. That means that individual programs might have a capacity and students might not get their first choice. That being said, though, 70% of students get at least a top three school of placement. So if they wanted to go to one of three schools, 70% chance likely that they're getting into one of those. Students choose five choices to rank. Our office works pretty differently, though. A student is applying directly to the program that they are trying to go to, and they're much more likely to get their first choice of location. But again, the flip side of that is that they might not be getting the exact credits that they need. So they have that option to go abroad through us, but they might not be getting all of the exact credits that they need, whereas they might on a Freeman Abroad program. We also have a different application and a different process and even different deadlines. So Freeman's study abroad application is February 5th. So coming up relatively closely, I suppose. And then ours is February 12th. So they're about a week apart. They're similar, but the programs and the process for study abroad is very different.
Yeah, so Mike really already pretty much explained this advising support, but just the delineation of the different advising offices at Tulane. So there's college advising, the academic advisor, they are there to make sure that the student is progressing towards graduating at the time that they have set. They're the degree audit readers. They advise on all of the things of like maybe you should take this when you're abroad, maybe you can take that when you're abroad. But our office is there to say, okay, let's, your advisor suggested this. Let's actually comb through these websites. Let's talk about differences in academic grading cultures. Let's talk about whether your identity will be supported abroad. We're really kind of that abroad piece of things and less so on the academic planning. We will support it, but it's not as much, we don't have pretty much any authority to sign off on where classes go on that audit. We are the grantors of that general elective credit, but not much more past that. So the major advisor, the student doesn't have to study abroad for their major. We hear that a lot also from students if they want to take a break, maybe they're pre-med and they just really, really want a semester where they're not focusing on all these hard sciences and they want to focus on just personal growth. Great, power to them. Have that conversation both with their college advisor and also their major advisor just to make sure that the progression is going okay. So the major advisors, the departments have a lot of say over something, whether something does or doesn't count. But we have our setup the way we do so that in the off chance scenario that a department says, no, just kidding, jump scare, I won't accept this class, that it is still counting as general elective credit towards the 120 credit hours a student ultimately needs to graduate. Pretty much no matter what, a student must take one or two classes or more, maybe, depending on their timeline, that just are only for the hours. And a savvy student can make their study abroad semester about that, make their study abroad semester really about taking really localized classes or something that they've never gotten a chance to explore before. But lots of advisors, your students should be meeting with all of these different people, and also, really importantly, declaring their major before they plan on studying abroad. If they're a sophomore right now, they have to do it by the end of the year anyway, but our office requires a major advisor to sign off on their application. And the only way they're going to get one is if they declare. So this is really the season to declare. They've probably have a pretty good hunch already. They just need the final nudge.
So while abroad, I know you can probably tell that we really like Venn diagrams. So while abroad, students also have different resources that can help with different things too. So they still have access to us here at Tulane for all of those culture shock or support with on-site issues or that credit transfer, making sure that the classes that they're taking are going to count for what they need them to. And they also have a host program or host university that can help with, again, those culture shock on-site issues and registering for those classes. They might need to be going directly to them in order to get into those classes that they need to be in, or to get syllabi for those classes to make sure they can get those credits. So they really just want to be making sure that they're talking to the right person, but we can both obviously help with emergency situations and the supporting of that aftermath too.
So, also really important for every parent is safety. So we just ran the numbers from our last year's worth of students, and 75% of them had no health and safety concerns at all, which is a really wonderful number, and that's a worldwide number. We do have through our office something called Crisis 24. So every single student who is studying abroad through our office has access to this. So they are 24/7 kind of essentially monitoring and support, whether medically or security, whatever it is. They basically do worldwide monitoring of all students. Students can download an app, and that gives real-time updates to Crisis 24 about their movements. And they can help with a ton of things. Maybe the student has been unfortunately hospitalized, and the student's really having a hard time navigating referrals. Crisis 24 can kind of step in, be the middleman, and facilitate any conversations that need to be had there. But also, the programs themselves have really robust support networks. Many of them have really suggested doctors or psychologists, and also very cultural specific information for students about how to navigate these processes. Like going to the doctor can be really, really different in another country. And having someone there to kind of support going through that process is really helpful. Like I said, our office or Tulane has a travel agency, and all Tulane students must book through this travel agency when they are studying abroad, with the exception of using points, or if they get a scholarship that covers their flight. No one's going to fight you on that. But this does ensure quick rebooking in case there is any emergency. The travel agents basically have the ability to kind of cut through a lot of airplane bureaucracy. If you've ever tried to call an airline, it's a pain in the butt. But the travel agents have really like direct corporate contacts at those airlines and can really help with the rebooking. Um, and if you really are nervous, I would also say think about doing having your student do an OSA summer program. So these are ones that are run by our office. So like I personally, Siena, go with the students to Stockholm with their Tulane faculty and their other fellow Tulane students. So it really is a good way for students to kind of dip their toes into the water of study abroad for just about a month or so and see what do they like, what do they not like, what do they gain from that experience, all while earning already Tulane credit. It is essentially summer school, much better backdrop, and also with me who will go and sit with your student in the hospital room overnight if necessary.
So, just a couple of quick facts here about our health and safety kind of conversation. So, common complaints lie in differences between U.S. and abroad. Really, that's one of the larger ones that we have. Things like tap water taste, secondhand smoke, transportation differences, that sort of thing. As far as the more serious concerns go, those I know may seem a little silly, but we do hear them. But as far as the more serious ones go, the biggest ones that we get are pickpocketing and street harassment. So those are the most common. It's very rare that we have an incident, period, but if we do have one, they're usually that. Something that I think is really interesting to point out is kind of the numbers related to the health complaints and safety complaints we hear from students. One thing that we have often heard, both from parents and also from students, is that Australia or the Islands is too far. It's just too far away. But one interesting thing about that is that they also have the lowest health complaints and safety complaints. So all that to say, safety is kind of a loaded word, and it's kind of an interesting conversation to have, and it may be fraught with some emotional stuff. But when you actually look at the percentages, it might turn out to be different than you expected.
And also importantly, those numbers are adjusted by proportion of students who are on the programs. So
Right.
yeah, per capita, basically. So safety and context. I also think this is a really fascinating moment to look at our cultural perception of safety by looking at it through someone else's, which is also the point of study abroad. But these are all travel warnings from various governments, equivalents of the State Department, travel.state.gov. This is the equivalent for those countries talking about the United States. So things like in the United States, we are, according to New Zealand, we are a level 2 of 4 on their scale. a lot of this is centered around mass shootings, and viewing them through the lens of domestic terrorism, which is really not the lens that we as the in the US think about them. So I think that is really important to kind of think about, start thinking about these differences, just because the students are not safe here in the US necessarily.
So we won't dwell on this too long, but this is just to kind of continue illustrating that kind of flipped script. So this is the number of gun violence incidents and deaths in 2023. And obviously this is a very heavy topic, but it's really just to have that conversation around safety as a concept and as kind of a thought. So this again is the reason why these countries are issuing these kind of warnings and travel advisories, is a lot of times down to the level of gun violence that we have here in the States.
And we also really do take safety very seriously at our office. So we do not approve programs that are in a level 3 or level 4 travel advisory, nearly across the board. And we also really want students to challenge that sense of perspective of what safety and health means. Like the numbers between Latin America and Europe were pretty on par of student complaints of health and safety concerns. And that is also reflected when through the State Department's travel warnings. Like we hear from a lot of students, I will be safer in Spain. When the State Department says, you'll actually be safer in Argentina, we give it a lower, we think it is safer there than going to Spain. A lot of it is that Western Europe really feels safe emotionally. It feels like a place that a lot of other students have been, that they know there will be other college students. But there's that, by that same vein, a lot of people get who pickpocket specifically college study abroad students just because there are so many of them. Um, I really do think for the most part, most students are either at the same or less, or just are safer when they are abroad compared to being in New Orleans to being in the United States. And we're also really happy to have like those really maybe those more nuanced conversations with your student that are more about their identity safety. I had one today with a student who was Asian American, and she was really worried about how different countries would perceive her. And we really had a great conversation together. And that is the kind of conversation we really do want to have with your students, and we are also happy to have. But safety and security really does matter to us, on the whole.
So as Sienna mentioned, one of the ways that they can be extra supported is by going on one of our summer study abroad programs. And like Sienna said, we actually go on these programs with your students, and that ensures that they're having both Tulane faculty alongside them and Tulane study abroad advising in person on the ground. If a student has an incident, they can talk about us right then and there over a cup of coffee. We're happy to do it, and we love to kind of be that on-site support for them. So if you are really extra concerned about safety, or the student is just not ready to study abroad for a full semester yet, or they just need a couple of extra credits towards graduation and are thinking about doing summer school, this could be a really great option for them in order to get those extra credits and have a really great time on one of our summer programs. We've got a lot of different options and more being added this year as well. So definitely encourage your student to keep your eye out for that. As far as when summer study abroad is done, it really varies based on the student, but we're seeing it trend even more common in between a student's first and second year. So it really can be a great introductory study abroad experience, or it can be a student that really wasn't able to study abroad, or maybe they missed the boat a little bit. They can study abroad in between their junior and senior year. That's fine too.
Okay, so here is the email address. If you have questions that you want to email us, we are a little bit past 7, so I'll ask our presenters if you are available to take a few questions now. So we'll go ahead and do that. So I see that we have a couple of questions submitted already. And so I would ask if you still have a question, go ahead and type that in as quickly as you can right now, and we'll take a few of these before we close. So let's see. One of the questions is, can you come late to the cafe if you have a class until 3? I'm
Yes.
not, okay.
Absolutely. Strongly encouraged. These are
Okay.
definitely walk-in advising appointments, so students can chat with us, for really as long as they want, but they tend to be drop-in. I have a quick question. I have 5 minutes, and even in between classes, that's great.
Yeah, those are really lovely events. I will just say, as another campus partner, it's just great to see the connections that are happening at those events every week. So here's another question. If you want to live with a certain group, splitting with someone each semester, and so I guess they mean living here. Oh no, let's see. Sienna, did you already answer that? If you want to
Uh,
live with a certain group, splitting someone each semester, one goes away in fall, one in spring, and that would save money. So.
So this is like if you and a friend coordinated, one of you goes in the fall, one of you goes in the spring. So this is something that used to be allowed under HRL's rules and is no longer allowed. So essentially, that spring student must stay in Tulane housing for their fall semester, and that fall student must expect to pay for that empty bedroom. This is part of, what this is part of a larger conversation I encourage you to have with HRL, but overall, they have made it very clear that they are not releasing spring study abroad students from the on campus residency requirements, regardless of whether they're studying abroad or not.
So the next question is CIEE Ireland says housing is included. And this is a
Right.
question.
Great question here. I know this can be a little confusing. So essentially what you're seeing there is the way that CIE publishes that is that they publish it as one kind of lump sum. But if you actually click on it and open it up, tuition and housing are separate costs there. So tuition, anything that's associated with those educational costs, that's not going to CIE. You're just paying that directly to CIE for housing. So housing is a different beast. Tulane, you're paying tuition to Tulane and housing to CIEE. So even though it says it's included, what it means is it's included in that lump sum that they're presenting you.
So the next question is, can the student do two study abroad programs in two different locations? Could they go on semester study abroad their sophomore year, or do they have to wait to do it their junior year?
Yeah, so our office does not have any timing requirements. The only requirements we have is a 2.5 GPA, that they've done their TIDES, that they've done their first tier writing, and hopefully that they've done their first tier service learning. And that one we can negotiate on. We know that the seats are hard to get sometimes. But it really depends on the host university. Some will only accept students at junior year standing, and some are really flexible. But off the top of my head, I know a student that I've worked with since her freshman year. Now she's a senior, but she spent a semester in Budapest studying mathematics, and then she went on to do a full academic year, or went to Budapest in sophomore year for a semester, and then she did an academic year at the London School of Economics for her junior year, and now she's back for senior year. So we have plenty of students who go all over the place. One of our peer advisors, I think, studied abroad 7 different times, something very high. But as long as the program will take you and you meet our requirements, we are happy to support.
So this question is, I've heard of Freeman students getting VRBO or Airbnb type accommodations. Is that just a Freeman thing?
Great question. It might be. So again, this is a really great opportunity to again mention that our policies in our offices are very, very different. So if you are hearing something from Freeman or from a student or a parent of a Freeman student, that might not be the case with our office. So always encourage your student to be making sure that they're talking to the right people. If that is a policy, I'm actually not aware of that one. They might allow independent housing through Freeman, although we don't allow it through OSA. So again, our policies are very different, our programs are very different, and students are going to have different experiences by going through one office versus another.
Yeah, I would say on the housing front, for the majority of Freeman programs, housing is independent and it is not guaranteed. So like if your student goes through Freeman, they can choose their own housing. They don't know if that Verbo they paid for is actually real until they get there. Conversely, with our office, housing is guaranteed and mandatory. So trade-offs, different policies, and students who are living in one or the other, they do not mix. So even if your Freeman student, or if your Freeman student goes through our office to specifically go to Madrid, let's say, they cannot live with their student or their friends who are going through Freeman's Madrid program, even though they are in the same city.
The next question is, what is the application deadline for the spring separation?
It's
I'm assuming
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, separation? Is that as far as is that a
Um,
housing question?
I
Maybe
am
application typo.
If you're talking about the application deadline for study abroad for spring is actually past. It's September. So we operate on a September February cycle. So for fall study abroad, our application deadline is in February, and for spring study abroad, our application deadline is in September. So students are applying for study abroad the semester prior to when they actually want to be abroad, and they apply pretty early into that semester, so they should definitely be planning in advance.
The next question, to clarify, you can do a summer program after your first year and also do the study abroad semester your junior year. So they can
Yeah.
apply
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
more than one.
Yes. And I see a lot of like summer abroad students who go on, like they really feel confident about what they want out of their semester abroad because they had that shorter summer experience. Like one of the students in that like moose making photo went on to go do a semester in Botswana afterwards because it caused her to have a big career life change. And how cool is it that she got to find something she really wanted to do for her junior year abroad?
The next question is, can a SOPA student participate in summer study abroad? That's our School of Professional Advancement.
I don't see why not. There shouldn't be any reasons that you can't.
Yeah, the summer study abroad programs are kind of operating under Tulane's summer school requirements. So that's a great question for Tulane summer school, but I believe so.
And I will try to look up the email address for that and include it in the follow-up email that everybody will get. And if you are coming to Family Weekend, there will be a summer opportunities fair where we will have a lot of different departments that sponsor summer school programs, whether research opportunities, courses, study abroad programs that are in the summer, so that we have one special program for that during Family Weekend. And they have also created, so we've done this for I think 2 years now, and they also create a website. So even if you can't attend that in person, if you're not planning to come for Family Weekend, in the family newsletter, I'll share the website that they will have that'll have the most recent information after that weekend. Let's see. The next question is, there are cost estimates on the website. Are those in addition to the Tulane tuition, or does the tuition cover some of those fees? So could you go over that again? I think Mike
Yeah.
talked about that earlier.
The Tulane tuition will cover any tuition-based fees, or if they're like hyper-specific class fees, like the art, like a studio art class requires a $200 art class fee. Tulane tuition will cover that. The only thing that our office does not cover is housing. So essentially, a Tulane student, when they study abroad, they are still a Tulane student. They are just comically off campus, and their program is their off campus landlord. But otherwise, they are still enrolled at Tulane.
To study abroad, do students need to know the local language of the country that they'll be studying in?
No, no, although it is encouraged to hopefully take some of that language while you're there. So for students, there are lots of English taught options available in most places that we have. Most programs or most locations we have a program or two that's going to have an English taught option. That being said, lots of times students are just starting that language learning process when they are studying abroad. So we do encourage a student to take language classes while they're abroad, but there's lots of options available for students that have not started that yet.
And then
And
some that
student,
are very language immersive,
Mhm.
right? So they've got options if they
Yeah,
if that's a big part of their drive for studying abroad to gain more fluency in a foreign
Correct. Yep.
language.
and students who major or minor in a language have even higher post-grad job placement rates.
Okay. Um, will students be accepted in multiple programs, for one time period, I think they mean, and can choose which one they're interested in, or do they apply and they're selected to only one option?
Yeah, so through our office, students are only applying to one program. So this is because we really want students to be making a very active choice as they go. I'm a pre-COVID study abroad advisor, so I've seen kind of how hard it is for students to sit in that kind of uncertainty zone for a really long time, which is why we really want to front load those conversations and really make them understand and feel good about their first choice. Because I would say for a grand chunk of our programs, students will get into their first choice. We have a handful of programs that are slightly crankier than others in terms of acceptance because, they're like top 50 worldwide universities. And so they get to behave that way. But for the most part, students are going to go where they set their intentions to go. And if they don't, we have a lot of we have a lot of expertise in that as well. Students in general, apply to our office and apply to their program. And I kind of explain it as applying to our office. So that February 12th deadline is applying for permission to study abroad. Applying to the program is admission to that specific program. So if they don't get in at that admission stage, we'll say, hey, you still have permission. What do you want to do instead? How can we support you? How can we change directions in a way that still really makes you happy? And it gives you growth.
Something that we do in that application process is screen students that we think might be red flags for specific locations or specific programs. So we're usually pretty good about catching a student that really has not a great shot of getting into their program. But like Sienna said, most of the time students are getting into their first choice through our office.
The next question is, can a student request a roommate?
Depends on the program. Some programs have leniency for this, and some don't. Some really specifically try to split up people from the same school just so that they're not creating cliques.
And my impression from families I've talked with in the past is that it's probably better for a student to go into the process not banking on being able to room with a friend from Tulane and kind of putting all their eggs in that basket, because if that's just not how that program operates, they may kind of, shortchange themselves and eliminate some options and maybe be focused on some things that are not the way that program operates. And so, wouldn't you say, Sienna and
I,
Mike?
I'd really agree with that. I've definitely seen some friendship breakups from students who try to study abroad together and then realize like, ooh, we were good friends. We were not good roommates. We were not
Mhm.
good traveling companions. And also it's, kind of it's losing the chance to meet more new people if you really go in like set
Mhm.
on this one vision. Which is really why, like, yeah, that independence that we're trying to cultivate, we don't want it riding on another person. We want it to be riding on the student.
Right. And one person may be accepted to one program and another person's a better fit for a different program. And so I think that it's a good thing to think about ahead of time and like you all have talked about, kind of manage their expectations and sort out some of that readiness before they sort of bank on that and make that a critical part of whether they're going to be happy with the opportunity. Um, so this has come up again, the deadline to apply for summer abroad.
Yeah, so we have two rounds of deadlines for our OSA summer programs. There will be one on December 1st. That's essentially an early action deadline of like, I've applied and I'm gonna go. And then there's also a February 1st deadline, and then after that, if a program still has capacity to accept more students, they can reach out, but December 1st and then February 1st.
So while we're talking about deadlines, another question is, so is February 12th the internal deadline?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great question. So when students are studying abroad, they're applying twice. They're applying once through our office and once for that university or program that they're trying to go to. That February 12th deadline is our internal deadline. It's relatively early in the semester. That's because students need to also meet the deadlines that their program or university has for that external deadline. Those are usually much later. Sometimes they're even in March or April. So all that to say, we usually are having those deadlines so early in the semester to keep students on track for those external deadlines. So the internal deadline for Tulane permission to study abroad, February 12th. The external deadlines are going to vary by program.
And Mike, is that for fall or year-long programs for the subsequent academic year?
Great question.
not the
So
summer ones, right?
right. So February 12th is our internal application deadline for both fall study abroad, so fall 25, and also academic year fall 25, spring 26.
Okay. So folks, we're going to take just the last couple of questions and then close because it's already like 7:17. Um, if a student selects an international college or university that is not part of the Tulane recommended ones, and they get Tulane to approve it, is the tuition still covered under the Tulane tuition?
Yeah. So the eagle eyes may have spotted that we approve 47 countries technically, but students studied in 52 countries last year. So that is for students who have like really specific needs outside of our portfolio. So we do have a process. It's called the Independent Scholar option, where a student can petition to get a program approved just for them. So maybe they really have really specific language learning goals that our office just can't support at this time, or they really have like super niche academic things that can only be solved by being there. So we do work with students, and as soon as if they are approved for the independent scholar option, they are still going through our office. They've just kind of gone above and beyond to find a perfect program. The main thing is we don't really do repeats. So programs in like Spain, we have, I don't know, 20 something programs in Spain. There's probably something in there, but if your student wanted to go to Cambodia, we don't have anything in Cambodia. And that is an example of a successful independent scholar option from last year.
Okay. Um, if the student has questions when completing the student visa application for their study abroad country, can the Office of Study Abroad assist them?
Usually not. So legally, our office is not allowed to advise on specific visa concerns. Now, we can talk in vagaries or like we know this might be a challenging place to get a student visa for versus somewhere that might not be. But the majority of us are not very familiar with the visa process for all of our different programs and all of our different countries. That would be a great question to ask the specific university or program the student is doing. Because those places because those programs operate in those places, they likely have a better pulse on what the process will be like for applying for a student visa. So all that to say, we can probably point you in the right direction of who to talk to, but talking to us about specific visa concerns is probably not all that helpful.
Yeah, and we are happy to help your student like find that information. Sometimes it can just be confusing navigating a consulate's website. We can help them find it. But that's kind of the extent of what we can do. We don't have any ability to do like batch visa processing. Our office doesn't process anything. But we're happy to help the student help themselves. But a lot of the programs do have a really robust visa support that I really encourage students to lean on if they are really worried about it.
So, families, I think that you can see that it is a complicated process, but it is a very growth enhancing process for someone to navigate all of this and take all those steps to do the research, make the applications, meet the deadlines. But there's such a great payoff. But I do think that helping your student think through these things and have some of those early conversations to kind of gauge their readiness now that you've been through this presentation, we hope that this makes you more adept at helping your student consider all of those things and see what is helpful for your family to consider and what's possible. So we really do want to thank our presenters, Sienna and Mike. This was a fantastic overview, and we appreciate your answering the questions and staying late to do that. And families were grateful that you're interested. Um, so again, I'll just remind you that we will put this information on the family programs website, and we'll send information directly to all of you who pre-registered for the webinar. So the website is families.tulane.edu. You just navigate to the communications tab and look for the webinars section. And while we have a part for the upcoming webinars there where you can register, then we also have the archive of the past webinars. So I'll just remind everybody that if you have specific questions about this content, then you can email osa@tulane.edu. If you have comments about just family webinars in general, or you want to offer some feedback or even suggestions for future webinar topics, then please email me at families@tulane.edu. So that's families plural at tulane.edu. If you want to type in a quick note to with feedback, we're happy to get that, but we'll close in just a second. So we really do appreciate your feedback. You may get a request to fill out a quick survey to give us some more feedback too in the future. So we hope you have appreciated this offering, and that I also would just like to say that we are going to offer for the first time in January a webinar on the re-entry process that Mike and Sienna mentioned, in that that kind of process of the experience that students go through. And so while those of you whose students are considering it now don't need that yet, I hope that's going to be a really great additional resource that we offer to families, so that you can help students in that whole phase. You can support them through the application process and considering it, to their experience while they're abroad, and then when they're navigating that re-entry back to the US and back to campus. So thanks again so much. We appreciate your time and attention and your interest in this topic. Thanks again to Sienna and Mike. And so we will close now and say have a good evening. Thank you, everyone.